The text that changed everything. I thought I was spending a quiet Friday fixing a few problems around the house. Instead, it became the day I started questioning every memory I'd ever shared with my wife. My name is Michael Carter, and until that morning, I believed I knew Emily better than anyone else in the world. We'd been married for 16 years. We had no children, a friendly golden retriever named Max, and a peaceful home in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't a perfect marriage. We argued about little things like every couple, but I never doubted her honesty. Not once. That Friday, Emily was leaving to spend the weekend with her older sister, Jennifer. Before backing out of the driveway, she rolled down her window and smiled. "Don't forget to feed Max," she teased. "I won't," I replied. "And try not to spend the whole weekend working." "I'll do my best." She laughed, waved goodbye, and drove away. I watched until her car disappeared around the corner. If I'd known what was about to happen, I would have asked her to stay. For nearly 3 months, we'd been dealing with strange electrical issues. The hallway lights flickered almost every evening. The kitchen outlets occasionally stopped working for a few minutes before coming back to life, and the basement breaker had developed a habit of tripping at the worst possible times. Emily wanted to hire an electrician weeks ago, but life kept getting in the way. With the house finally empty, I figured there was no better time. A local electrical company answered my call and scheduled a technician for later that morning. At exactly 10:15, a white service van pulled into my driveway. The electrician introduced himself as Mike Thompson. He looked to be in his late 40s, friendly but professional, with the kind of calm confidence that comes from decades of experience. After a quick tour of the house, I explained everything we'd been noticing. Mike listened carefully before nodding. "Intermittent electrical faults can be tricky," he said. "I'll probably need 30 or 40 minutes to trace what's causing it." "Take your time." He smiled. "If you've got an errand to run or want to grab lunch, now's actually a good time. I'll call if I need anything." There was a small cafe less than 5 minutes away. Question about the breaker panel. Instead, I read 6 words that instantly drained the color from my face.
"Sir, I think you need to come home."
For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen. What could possibly be so serious? I stood up so quickly that my chair scraped across the floor. Without touching my coffee, I hurried toward the parking lot. I had barely reached my car when my phone buzzed again. Another message from Mike. This one was even shorter. "Please don't call your wife until you get here." I froze. My thumb hovered over the screen as my heart began pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. An electrician had just told me not to call my own wife. At that moment, getting home wasn't the only thing on my mind anymore. I was wondering, what had he found? Why would an electrician tell a complete stranger not to call his own wife? 10 minutes later, I found out what Mike found. The drive home should have taken less than 10 minutes. It felt like an hour. Every red light seemed to last forever, and every slow-moving car in front of me made my pulse climb higher. My eyes kept drifting back to Mike's last message on the phone resting in the passenger seat. "Please don't call your wife until you get here." Why would he say that? I thought about calling him instead, but something stopped me. If he believed the situation was serious enough to send a text like that, maybe talking on the phone wasn't the best idea. By the time I turned onto my street, I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. Mike's service van was still parked outside my house. Nothing looked unusual. No police cars, no ambulance, no smoke, no neighbors gathered outside. The house looked exactly as I'd left it. I jumped out of the car before the engine had fully stopped. Mike was already standing on the front porch. He wasn't holding any tools. His face had lost the calm confidence he'd shown earlier. As soon as I reached him, I asked the only question that mattered. "Mike, what's going on?" Instead of answering, he looked over his shoulder toward the street. Then back at me. "Let's go inside." His voice was quiet, almost cautious. The moment we stepped into the hallway, I noticed something strange. The lights weren't flickering anymore. Everything was perfectly still. Mike closed the front door behind us. "I'm sorry if I scared you," he said. But I didn't know how else to explain this over a text. My stomach tightened. "What did you find?" He hesitated. "I wasn't even looking for it." "What do you mean?" "I was tracing one of the electrical lines through the basement. The wiring disappears behind a finished wall, which isn't unusual." He paused. But when I checked the measurements, he shook his head. They don't make sense. I frowned. What doesn't? The basement is smaller than it should be. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. What are you talking about? Mike pulled out the measuring tape clipped to his belt. I measured this side of the foundation from outside. Then he pointed toward the basement stairs. I measured it again from inside. And? There's nearly 4 feet missing. I laughed nervously. You're telling me my basement lost 4 feet? I wish I were. He looked me straight in the eye. Either these measurements are wrong. He swallowed. Or there's a space behind that wall that isn't shown anywhere. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The house was 20 years old. We'd lived there for 16. I had been in every room, or at least I thought I had. Mike picked up his flashlight. I haven't opened anything. I figured that decision should be yours. I stared toward the basement door. My heart was pounding so hard it almost hurt. If there really was a hidden space beneath my house, who built it? And more importantly, why had Emily never mentioned it? Before we find out what's behind that wall, if this story has you hooked so far, I'd love to invite you to subscribe. Every mystery on this channel is carefully written from the ground up, with believable characters, emotional twists, and stories designed to keep you guessing until the very end. Your support helps us create more original stories like this every week. Now, let's see what was hiding behind that wall. Mike handed me the pry bar. There should be nothing behind this drywall, he whispered. So if there is... He didn't finish the sentence. I took a deep breath and swung the room behind the wall. I tightened my grip on the pry bar. For a long moment, neither Mike nor I spoke. The basement felt unnaturally quiet. Even the familiar hum of the furnace seemed to have disappeared, leaving only the sound of my own breathing. Mike finally broke the silence. Michael, if there's a space behind this wall, it doesn't automatically mean something's wrong. I looked at him. Then why do I feel like I'm about to find out my house has been lying to me? He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped aside. The decision was mine. I slipped the flat end of the pry bar beneath the trim and pulled. Crack. The wood separated from the wall. A second strike punched through the drywall. I expected to see insulation. Instead, there was nothing. Just darkness. Mike slowly raised his flashlight and shined it through the opening. The beam disappeared into an empty space. Without saying a word, we widened the hole until we could step through. On the other side was a narrow passage. A bare concrete floor lay beneath a thin blanket of gray dust, while unfinished wooden studs lined the walls. The air smelled stale, as though no fresh breeze had reached the space in years. I've never seen anything like this, Mike murmured. Neither had I. The passage stretched roughly 15 feet before ending at a plain wooden door. No window, no handle on the outside. Just an old wooden door standing where no room should have existed. I turned toward Mike. Could someone have built this later? He studied the walls for another second before quietly replying, not without someone knowing. A chill ran through me. We lived in this house for 16 years. How could an entire section of it exist without either of us ever noticing? Then something near the floor caught my eye. I crouched down. The dust covered almost every inch of the passage, except for a narrow trail of footprints. Only one set. The prints led straight toward the wooden door. There weren't any footprints leading back. Mike knelt beside me. Those weren't made today by us. I slowly shook my head. No. The dust around them was untouched. Whoever walked through here had done it before we opened the wall. I followed the footprints until they stopped at the door. Just as I reached for it, something else caught my attention. Tucked against the wall beside the frame was a small rechargeable flashlight. I picked it up. It wasn't dusty. In fact, it was fully charged. I pressed the power button. The light came on instantly. Mike frowned. That hasn't been sitting here for years. My heartbeat quickened. Someone had been using this hidden passage. Recently. Then I looked down again. Partially hidden beneath the flashlight was something else. A familiar blue fabric keychain. I froze. I'd seen it hundreds of times before. It belonged to Emily. The same keychain she kept attached to the spare house key she'd claimed she lost nearly 2 years ago. I stared at it in disbelief. There was no way it could be here. And yet, there it was. I picked up Emily's keychain with trembling hands. Mike looked at me but didn't say a word. He didn't have to. For the first time that afternoon, I stopped wondering what was hidden behind the wall and started wondering how long my wife had been keeping it from me. Emily knew about this room. For several seconds, I couldn't take my eyes off the blue keychain resting in my hand. Emily had searched the entire house for it nearly 2 years ago. She checked every drawer, every jacket pocket, even the trash cans. At least, that's what she'd told me. "Michael?" Mike's voice pulled me back. "You okay?" I looked at him, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was slowly nod toward the wooden door. "I have to know." He gave a small nod. "Then let's find out." I pushed against the old door. It opened with a long, tired creak. The room beyond wasn't dark or abandoned like I'd imagined. It was neat, almost intentional. Metal shelves lined one wall, holding clear plastic storage bins with handwritten labels. A folding chair sat beside a small workbench. On top of it rested a rechargeable lantern, a first aid kit, and a portable battery pack. The battery pack was switched on. A small green light blinked steadily. Mike noticed it too. "That's fully charged." He walked over for a closer look but stopped short of touching it. "Someone's been here recently." I slowly looked around the room. There was very little dust, no cobwebs, no signs of years of neglect. This wasn't an abandoned hiding place. Someone had been maintaining it. And judging by the keychain still in my hand, that someone was Emily. 1,000 questions raced through my mind. Why had she hidden this room? Why keep it a secret from me? And why pretend she'd lost the spare key? Against the far wall stood a gray filing cabinet. Unlike everything else in the room, it wasn't covered by a cloth or pushed into a corner. It almost looked waiting. I took a slow step toward it. Mike glanced at me. "Michael." His voice was gentle. "You don't have to do this alone." I managed a faint smile. I think whatever's inside was meant for me. The top drawer slid open without resistance. Inside were neatly arranged folders, house documents, insurance, warranty manuals. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. Then I noticed a single white envelope resting on top. Nothing else in the drawer mattered anymore. Across the front, written in familiar blue ink, were 5 simple words. "For Michael, if you find this." The room seemed to disappear around me. I didn't need to ask whose handwriting it was. I'd seen it on birthday cards, sticky notes on the refrigerator, Christmas gift tags. For 16 years, it was Emily's. My hands trembled as I picked up the envelope. It felt heavier than it should have, almost as if the weight came from what was inside rather than the paper itself. I carefully opened it. A folded letter slipped into my hands. The date at the top caught my attention. It had been written 11 months earlier. I unfolded the first page. Before I could read a single word, Mike quietly stepped toward the doorway. "I'll wait outside," he said softly. Then he paused. "Whatever's in that letter." He looked me in the eyes. "I have a feeling your wife wanted you to find it, eventually." He walked into the passage, giving me the privacy I didn't even realize I needed. I took a deep breath. Then I lowered my eyes to the first line. The letter began with 7 words I never expected to read. "Michael, I'm sorry I lied to you." And with that single sentence, everything I believed about my marriage began to unravel. The truth Emily could never say out loud. For several seconds, I couldn't read another word. The letter rested in my hands while my mind kept returning to the same sentence. "Michael, I'm sorry I lied to you." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the portable battery pack on the workbench. Outside, I could hear Mike pacing slowly through the narrow passage, giving me the space I needed. I took a deep breath and kept reading. "I know what this room makes you think. If I were in your place, I'd probably believe the worst too. But before you decide who I am, I need you to believe one thing. I have never betrayed our marriage. Not once." I stopped. Those words didn't erase the doubt inside me, but they did force me to question the story I'd already built in my own mind. The next paragraph finally answered the question that had haunted me since I found Emily's keychain. "You're wondering why I kept coming here. The answer is simple, even if the reason isn't. I was protecting someone. Not because I loved them more than you, but because I couldn't live with myself if I walked away. Protecting someone." The same words again. This time they carried a little more weight. Folded between the pages was the photograph I'd noticed earlier. I picked it up again. Now that I looked more carefully, I realized I'd been focused on the wrong thing. Emily wasn't smiling. Neither was the man beside her. They were both staring toward the entrance of a hospital. The picture didn't look posed. It looked like someone had captured a moment neither of them knew was being photographed. Mike stepped quietly into the room. "Can I see it?" he asked. I handed it over. He studied it for a few moments before pointing to the lower corner. Look at the timestamp. I leaned closer. October 14th, 4:18 p.m. A wave of memories hit me. 16 years earlier. Emily had called that afternoon and told me she'd been in a minor car accident. When she came home, she looked exhausted, shaken. I asked if she wanted to talk about it. She simply smiled and said, "I'm okay, that's all that matters." And because I trusted her, I never asked another question. Mike handed the photograph back. "I don't know who this man is," he said quietly. "But I think your wife wanted you to notice the date more than the person." I looked down at the next paragraph. His name is Daniel Harper. I didn't know him before that afternoon. I wasn't hiding in a relationship. I was hiding a promise. A promise. Not an affair. A promise. As I lowered the photograph, something else caught my eye. Every storage bin on the shelf had a handwritten label. Family keepsakes, tax records, holiday decorations, every one of them, except the largest one on the bottom shelf. It had no label at all. For a second I considered opening it, but the letter in my hands felt more important. I turned the page. The first sentence made my heart pound. "Michael, for 16 years you've believed the wrong version of what happened that afternoon." I barely had time to process those words before my eyes dropped to the next line, and suddenly, I couldn't breathe. The next sentence read, "The man you spent 16 years feeling sorry for was never the victim." I read it again, then a third time. Only one question echoed through my mind. If Daniel Harper wasn't the victim, then who was? The wrong story. I couldn't take my eyes off the sentence. The man you spent 16 years feeling sorry for was never the victim. I read it again. Then again. It didn't make any sense. Daniel Harper wasn't the victim? Then who was? I looked down at the next paragraph, almost afraid to continue. I know this is impossible to understand without context. That's why I need you to forget everything you think you know about October 14th. The story you were told wasn't completely false, but it wasn't the whole truth either. I asked people to leave parts of it out because I believed I was protecting our future. My heart skipped. I asked people, who? The police? The doctors? Someone else? Outside the room, Mike shifted his weight near the doorway. "Michael." I looked up. "You okay?" I shook my head. I don't think I ever really knew what happened that day. Mike glanced around the hidden room before speaking again. "You know what stands out to me?" "What?" He slowly pointed toward the shelves. "Everything in here serves a purpose. Medical records, emergency supplies, important papers." He paused. "But there's nothing sentimental." I frowned. "No family pictures. No keepsakes." He nodded. This wasn't built to hide memories. His eyes met mine. It was built to protect one. His words lingered in the silence. I turned back to the letter. The first time I met Daniel Harper wasn't at a restaurant or a cafe. It was inside County Memorial Hospital. We were strangers sitting on opposite sides of the same waiting room, both praying for different reasons. I studied the photograph again. It looked completely different now. Neither of them appeared happy. They looked exhausted, like two people whose lives had changed before either of them understood how. I kept reading. "You remember me telling you I'd been in a minor accident?" That part was true. What I never told you was what happened after the ambulance arrived. There was another vehicle, another family. I wasn't responsible for what happened. But from that moment on, our lives became connected in ways I never expected. So she hadn't lied about the accident. She'd lied about everything that followed. Mike folded his arms. So Daniel wasn't someone from her past. No. He entered your lives because of that accident. It seems that way. I turned another page. The handwriting looked less steady now, almost as if Emily had been struggling to write. "When I finally came home that evening, I told you traffic had delayed me." That wasn't true. I didn't walk through our front door until nearly 5 hours after I called you. And every anniversary after that, I wondered if I should finally tell you where those 5 hours went. 5 hours. I closed my eyes. I remembered pacing around the living room, calling her phone, watching the sun go down. When she finally arrived home, I was simply relieved she was safe. I never asked another question. Trust can be comforting. Sometimes, it can also make you blind. Just then, something slipped from between the pages and floated onto the floor. It wasn't another letter. It was a newspaper clipping. The edges had yellowed with age. Across the top was a headline about the accident. Someone had circled one paragraph in blue ink. I bent down and began reading. The circled paragraph didn't mention Emily. It didn't even mention Daniel. It mentioned a third person, and beside that person's name, Emily had written just 4 words. This is who I saved. The name in the newspaper. I picked up the newspaper clipping with trembling hands. The paper had yellowed with age, its edges worn from being folded and unfolded countless times. Someone, Emily I assumed, had circled a single paragraph in blue ink. I lowered my eyes and began reading. 8-year-old Sophie Harper remains in critical condition following Friday afternoon's multi-vehicle collision. Doctors say the next 24 hours will be crucial. Harper. My eyes snapped back to the photograph lying beside the letter. Daniel Harper. My stomach dropped. I looked back at the article, hoping I'd somehow misunderstood. I hadn't. The report explained that several vehicles had been involved in the crash. Most of the adults suffered relatively minor injuries. Only one person had been left fighting for her life, 8-year-old Sophie Harper. Beneath the article, Emily had written 4 words in blue ink. This is who I saved. For a long moment, I couldn't move. Saved? Emily had never told me she'd rescued anyone. She'd only said she'd been involved in a minor accident and was lucky to walk away. Nothing more. Mike stepped quietly beside me. What did you find? I handed him the clipping. He read it carefully before looking back at the photograph. So Daniel. I think he's Sophie's father. Mike nodded slowly. Then he looked at me. That doesn't sound like someone trying to hide an affair. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But another question refused to leave my mind. If Emily had saved a little girl's life, why had she hidden every trace of it? Why build a secret room? Why leave behind 20 pages instead of simply telling me the truth? Heroes don't usually spend 16 years hiding from the people they love. I picked up the letter again. The next page answered one question while creating 10 more. When I reached the other car, people were shouting from every direction. I could hear a little girl crying for help. I don't remember making a decision. I just remember running toward her. I could almost hear the panic. Car horns, frightened voices, twisted metal scraping against the road. A child desperately calls for someone to help. Someone grabbed my arm and told me to stay back. They thought the car might catch fire. I pulled away before I even realized what I was doing. I swallowed hard. Emily had never mentioned any of this. Not once. The next paragraph caught my attention immediately. Daniel thanked me more times than I could count. I kept telling him anyone would have done the same thing. Deep down, I knew that wasn't true, and neither did he. I continued reading. 3 days later, Daniel came to our house while you were at work. I almost pretended I wasn't home. I should have. That last sentence stopped me. I should have.
Not.
I'm glad I answered.
Not.
It was the right thing to do. Instead, I should have. Something happened during that visit. Something Emily regretted. Mike noticed my expression. What is it? I looked up slowly. I don't think the accident is what destroyed our peace. I lowered my eyes to the letter again. I think it was what happened after. The room suddenly felt colder. The hidden passage. The secret room. The years of silence. None of it began with the crash. It began with a knock on our front door 3 days later. The next page started with a single sentence. I read it once. Then again. It said, "The biggest mistake I ever made wasn't saving Sophie." My hands began to shake. It was opening the front door when Daniel came back. The knock at our door. I stared at the final sentence until the words began to blur. The biggest mistake I ever made wasn't saving Sophie. It was opening the front door when Daniel came back. For the first time since finding the hidden room, I wasn't thinking about the accident anymore. I was thinking about 3 days later, what could have happened inside my own home that Emily had hidden for 16 years. I took a slow breath and turned the page. Michael, before you judge Daniel, you need to know something. He didn't come to our house to threaten me. He didn't ask me for money. He came because he believed he owed me something he could never repay. I frowned. If that was true, why did Emily call it the biggest mistake of her life? I kept reading. He stood on our porch holding a small wooden box. I told him I couldn't accept it. Saving Sophie didn't give me the right to take anything from his family. But Daniel wouldn't leave. He kept saying the box no longer belonged to him. He believed it belonged to me. A wooden box. I slowly lowered the letter. Mike noticed my expression. What is it? I think. I glanced around the room. I think whatever Daniel brought her might still be here. Neither of us spoke again. Instead, we began searching the room more carefully. The shelves held exactly what their labels promised. Old insurance papers, medical files, emergency supplies. Nothing explained why Emily had built a secret life behind a wall. Then my eyes settled on the only storage bin without a label. It was larger than the others and pushed against the back wall. Unlike the rest of the room, something about it looked disturbed. The dust surrounding it had settled naturally over time, but the lid looked cleaner, as though someone had wiped a hand across it not long ago. Mike crouched beside it. "You see that too?" I nodded. "This room hasn't been abandoned." Carefully, I lifted the lid. Inside wasn't money, or jewelry, or stacks of old documents. There was only one object, a small wooden box. It was about the size of a hardcover novel, its dark oak surface worn smooth from years of handling. Resting neatly on top was a folded note. The handwriting was unmistakable. Emily's. I unfolded it. "Please read the entire letter before opening this box. If you're reading this, I know you'll want answers immediately." I did too, the day Daniel placed it in my hands. But trust me, opening it too soon will only make everything harder to understand. I closed my eyes. Even now, Emily was asking me to trust her. Mike looked at the box, then back at me. "Do you think she's telling the truth?" I don't know anymore. For 16 years, trusting Emily had been the easiest decision I'd ever made. Now, it was the hardest. I picked up the letter again. The next paragraph was short, painfully short. When Daniel handed me the box, he asked me to make one promise. At the time, I thought I'd only be keeping it for a few weeks. I never imagined that the promise would last 16 years. A promise. Everything seemed to come back to promises. Promises that had slowly turned into lies. I turned the page. The first sentence made my hands go cold. "Michael, if you're holding that box, it means Daniel never came back for it." For a long moment, neither Mike nor I said a word. Then Mike slowly knelt beside the storage bin again. His expression changed. "Michael." "What?" He pointed toward the lid. A thin layer of gray dust covered almost every inch of it, except for one place. Across the center was a single, perfectly clear handprint. Not an old one, a fresh one. I instinctively looked at my own hands. It wasn't mine. Mike slowly raised both of his. It wasn't me either. The room suddenly felt much colder. I looked back toward the narrow passage leading into the basement. The dust on the floor still showed the same old trail of footprints ending at the door. But someone had touched this box much more recently. Someone who knew exactly where it was hidden. Mike's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Michael, are you absolutely sure Emily is still at her sister's house?" Every hair on the back of my neck stood up. Just minutes earlier, I'd been trying to understand my wife's past. Now, I couldn't stop thinking about the present. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Without saying a word, I opened Emily's last message. It had been sent early that morning. "I'll call you when I get to Jennifer's." I stared at the screen. Then I realized something that made my stomach sink. She never did. The call that never came. I kept staring at my phone. Emily's last message filled the screen. "I'll call you when I get to Jennifer's." She always called, every single time she drove somewhere alone. Sometimes the call lasted less than a minute. Made it safely. That was our routine. One of those little habits that become part of a marriage without either person ever talking about them. But today, the call never came. I checked the time. It was almost 2 o'clock. She should have reached Jennifer's hours ago. Mike noticed the change in my face. "What is it?" I looked up. Emily never called. He frowned. Maybe she got distracted. I wanted to believe that. Instead, I tapped Jennifer's name. The phone rang twice before she answered. "Hey, Michael." Her voice sounded relaxed. Too relaxed. "Hi, Jennifer." I forced myself to stay calm. "Is Emily there?" There was a brief silence. "What do you mean?" "I mean, she left this morning." Another pause. Then Jennifer quietly replied, "Michael, she never came." Everything inside me stopped. "What?" "She called around 8 this morning," Jennifer said. "She told me she had one stop to make before driving here." "And then?" "I haven't heard from her since." My hand started shaking. For the first time that day, the hidden room didn't matter. The letter didn't matter. Even Daniel Harper didn't matter. Emily was missing, and I had no idea where she was. Mike watched my expression. "What happened?" I lowered the phone. "Jennifer says Emily never made it." His face turned pale. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The silence felt heavier than anything we'd discovered behind the wall. Then Mike slowly looked around the room. His flashlight stopped on the workbench. "Michael." I followed the beam. The rechargeable lantern we'd noticed earlier was no longer glowing. Instead, beside it sat something I was certain hadn't been there before. A paper coffee cup. There was no lid. No logo I'd recognize. Just a plain white cup. I walked over carefully. The coffee inside had gone cold, but it hadn't completely dried. Someone hadn't left it years ago. Someone had left it recently. Very recently. Mike studied the cup. People don't leave things like this unless they expect to come back. His words echoed through the room. I looked toward the hidden passage. Whoever had been here hadn't expected strangers to find this place. As I turned back toward the workbench, I noticed a folded sheet of paper tucked beneath the coffee cup. I carefully pulled it free. It wasn't Emily's handwriting. It was Daniel's. There was only one sentence. If this room is ever opened before I return, something has gone terribly wrong. Mike read it over my shoulder. He was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. People don't write notes like this unless they're expecting someone else to find them. I barely heard him. My eyes had drifted to the date written beneath the message. 3 weeks ago, I felt my stomach knot. Emily was missing. And somehow, Daniel Harper had been in this room only 3 weeks earlier. Either Emily had lied in her letter, or she had never gotten the chance to finish telling me the truth. I looked back at the unfinished stack of pages resting on the workbench. For the first time, I wasn't reading to understand the past anymore. I was reading because it might be the only chance I had to find my wife. I turned the note over. There was one final sentence written across the back. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Emily. If you're reading this, don't let Michael believe the version I told you. I felt a chill run through my entire body. There weren't just 2 versions of the truth. There were at least 3, and suddenly, I didn't know which one could save my wife. No more secrets. For several seconds, neither Mike nor I spoke. Emily's trembling voice still echoed in my ears. Please, don't come to the cabin. The call lasted less than 10 seconds. Then the line went dead. Mike looked at me. So, are we listening to her? I looked down at the address she'd written in the letter. If Emily truly wanted to disappear, she never would have called. She wanted me to know where she was. She just wasn't ready for me to arrive. We're going, I said quietly. But we do this carefully. Nearly 2 hours later, we turned onto a narrow gravel road that disappeared into a forest of towering pine trees. The cabin stood alone beside a quiet lake. No neighboring houses, no passing cars, only silence. Mike parked the truck without saying a word. As I stepped outside, something immediately felt wrong. The front door was slightly open. It moved gently with the wind. Emily? I called. Nothing. Mike placed a hand on my shoulder. Wait. He pointed toward the porch. Fresh tire tracks. They hadn't been there long. Someone else had arrived before us. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I slowly pushed the front door open. The cabin was empty. A fire still burned in the fireplace. 2 coffee mugs sat on the table. One was empty. The other was still warm. Mike touched it. They left only minutes ago. My heart started racing. Emily. My voice echoed through the cabin. Still no answer. Then I heard footsteps above us. Not running. Walking. Slowly. I looked at Mike. Without a word, we climbed the stairs. Every step felt heavier than the last. At the end of the hallway stood a single closed door. I reached for the handle. For one terrifying second, I wondered if I was too late. The door opened. Emily stood beside the window. She turned toward me. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Relief washed over me so suddenly my knees almost gave way. You came, she whispered. I had to. She looked down. I begged you not to. I know. Why? Her voice cracked. Because I wanted one last chance to tell you everything before the letters did. She wiped away another tear. I wasn't afraid of the cabin. She looked around the quiet room. I was afraid you'd learn the truth from strangers instead of hearing it from me. For the first time that day, everything she had done finally made sense. Not the lies, never the lies, but the fear behind them. Mike quietly stepped downstairs, leaving us alone. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. Why didn't you trust me? Emily looked at the floor. At first, I was afraid you'd think I'd betrayed you. Then I was afraid you'd hate me for waiting. She gave a weak smile through her tears. Eventually, I was afraid there was no way to tell the truth without losing you. I sat down across from her. I won't lie to you. My heart is broken. She closed her eyes. I know. I don't understand why you carried this alone. I don't understand why you believed I couldn't carry it with you. Tears rolled silently down her face. I was wrong. Yes. She nodded. I know. The room fell silent again. Not an angry silence, a painful one. The kind that exists when 2 people finally stop pretending everything is okay. After a long moment, Emily picked up the wooden box. I never opened it. I promised Daniel I wouldn't. She carefully handed it to me. This choice has always belonged to you. I slowly lifted the lid. Inside wasn't money or jewelry. There was a small silver bracelet engraved with the name Sophie. A faded hospital wristband. Several photographs showing Sophie growing from a frightened little girl into a confident young woman. At the bottom rested one final envelope. It was addressed to both of us. I unfolded the letter. Daniel's handwriting was unsteady. Michael, Emily, if you're reading this together, then you've already done something I always hoped for. You're talking honestly. That's more important than anything I can leave behind. Emily saved my daughter's life. Nothing I ever gave her could repay that debt. She believed silence would protect everyone she loved. I believe the truth eventually heals what silence only postpones. We never stopped disagreeing about that. If you're searching for perfect answers, I'm sorry. I don't have them. I only know that fear makes good people carry burdens they were never meant to carry alone. I folded the letter. There were still questions. Small ones. Perhaps there always would be. But the biggest mystery had finally been answered. Emily hadn't hidden another life. She had hidden one impossible promise. I looked at her. I can't promise everything will be okay tomorrow. She nodded before I even finished. I wouldn't believe you if you did. I need time. I know. But I reached across the table and gently took her hand. I'm willing to find out whether we can rebuild what's been broken. For the first time all day, she smiled. Not because everything was fixed, but because nothing else needed to be hidden. A month later, Mike helped me remove the false wall from our basement. The hidden room disappeared forever, not because we wanted to erase the past, but because we no longer needed a place to hide it. Sophie visited us a few weeks later. She hugged Emily without saying a word. Sometimes gratitude doesn't need an explanation. As for Emily and me, some days were easy, some weren't. Trust wasn't restored in a single conversation. It returned one honest conversation at a time. Looking back, I finally understood something I'd spent 16 years searching for. Secrets don't always begin with betrayal. Sometimes they begin with fear. But no matter how they begin, the only way they end is with the courage to tell the truth. The end.